Hey, what's up? This is Ian, and in this video, I want to talk about rust and what I've learned about how to remove it and deal with it. So, if you have rust on your vehicle or rust on any kind of metal and you want to know how to get it off, then I guess I'm making this for you. I've done a lot of YouTubing and a lot of experimenting with different things. So if you got a rusty van, it's not the end of the world, or a rusty car or truck, like you can fix it up. Usually, like sometimes it can be too far gone, like if it's got holes in it and stuff, but you can remove a lot of rust and like fix it up. So I'm gonna tell you how I did it and the tools I use. So before I ever started removing rust from um, my van or anything, I started with a stove, and I'm going to show you that stove. So this stove is just a little stove that I'm going to put in my van, and it started off with just like maybe like I don't even know, 3x4 sheets of rusty steel that I found on a lot nearby that's like abandoned. It's been abandoned for 30 years. And I took all the rust off. And so I'm going to show you how I took it off first. So this was all really, really, really nasty rust. And I don't know if you can see in the video, but if you look closely, you'll see some little pits in it. So that was like all pitting rust. And I took most of it off. So I'm going to show you the first tool I used to do that. So was this an angle grinder? And it works pretty good, and this attachment works especially well. So you can use an angle grinder in this tool to remove rust. This is called a flap disc. This tool is actually, angle grinder has been quite handy with steel and cutting steel. This is a cutting disc, but this one, or they also make a wire brush disc. This is for a drill. Now, I don't find it, I didn't think it worked very well with the drill. It's just kind of hard to hold, and you hold it up to something and it's not very easy to use. So the angle grinder, I never used it on my van. I'm going to show you my van in a bit in its current state. I don't have the before and after. I'll see if I can dig something up, but I don't think I have. It's like when I'm making a video, I kind of just want to make the video, and when I'm working, I just kind of want to work and not do super fancy editing job and stuff. And I know that's kind of cooler sometimes to see the before and after pics. Anyways, I'll try to see what I can dig up. But so this on a van, on the frame rails, in some places you could use it. It's not very detailed though. So this, you can't get into really tight places or curved or, all the little nuances of stuff. But if you got a big open sheet, like I did with this, like this was all big. So my idea for this stove came primarily from tent stoves. Like I YouTubed a lot of tent stoves and look at people selling tent stoves and looked at their stoves. And everything is, it's a very simple stove, and I plan to burn wood and waste oil. Likely waste vegetable oil. And I experimented with that a little bit, and pretty cool. I like it. It's not as like filthy as wood or any other kind of waste oil. So yeah, so the first thing I did, I used the angle grinder, and then now I guess I'm kind of going back and forth through the stove, and then I'm talking about the car or the van or the car, the stove. I'm going to talk about tools first, and then I'm going to get to liquids. So jumping forward. Now to remove loose rust. This tool works pretty good. I got it at Harbor Freight. It's $26. But this is my third one, okay? In about 2 weeks, I spent about, probably a week and a half or so just removing rust, okay? So I primarily use this tool. This little brush is a really good deal for 99 cents. Quite useful. It can get into like really tight places and to remove rust, and it works pretty good. But sometimes when there's like scaling rust and stuff, um, yeah, it doesn't work so great for that. Really loose rust will come off, and this works good for scaling rust. But it's got some limitations. Like I said, this is my third one. First one, there's a spring inside here that broke. I opened it up and I looked at it as like, I thought it was 3 pieces, and I was trying to put 3 pieces back together. Then I looked at the manual and realized it's only supposed to be 1 piece. Then the second one I got didn't work. I don't know why. It just shot air out and didn't work. This is the third one. So yeah, maybe that says something. I think it works pretty good, but it's small. So they make a bigger one, and I think it's like, this is like maybe 12 of these needles. So they kind of work. Oh, one other thing. They kind of work like a, what am I looking for? They kind of work like a little hammer or like a little chisel, and they like sort of like vibrate. They vibrate, the little needles kind of vibrate forward and back, and they gradually chip away the loose rust and stuff. Work pretty good. So manual tools, actually a hammer can work pretty good too. Just pounding on loose rust. If you see loose rust or scaling rust, if you just pound on the rust, eventually it's going to come off. It's going to take a lot of pounding and a lot of time. And these are 2 manual tools you could use to remove rust. You can get a bigger one too. I had a bigger one I use sometimes. I just thought this one was a little more handy most of the time. So this, you need an air compressor for this too. I wish they made an electric one. I got to borrow my brother's, and like I said, it works, but limitations, a little bit small. It's not very fast. And my third one. Now, so that's like removing. These are some tools you can use to remove rust. Wire brush. They got this attachment, if I didn't say, for an angle grinder too. You can try that. This one works good on big open spaces. This one works good on like tight little weird ununiform places, like for example, like on your leaf spring, like shackles and stuff. There's all kind of curves and weird stuff, and it doesn't work super well when you hold it on an angle, and sometimes all you can do is hold it on an angle because of where you are under the car. Like I was basically underneath the car without a lift, or underneath the van without a lift, removing it, and very dirty job. And you want to wear a mask. Oh, another tip. So speaking of mask, is to spray down the area that you work on before you take a needle scaler to it, or an angle grinder, or a hammer, or a wire brush, because all this, when you start pounding on this rust and loosening it up, it's just going to become airborne, and it's going to be really toxic. So you really want to wear a mask, and I would wet it down first. Other thing, I did this in the winter, so you have to keep that in mind. Some things are going to be different, and it was cold out, sometimes below freezing, and I'm out there doing this. So next section I want to talk about is liquids for removing rust. And I'll go back to the stove here. Phosophoric acid. Let's see. Hammer, cheap, easy tool. Let's talk about 3 things. There are different kinds of acids out there, and I tried a few. I also tried vinegar. I don't think it really worked that well, to be honest, for me, from my point of view. These work a little differently though. Molasses. Okay, so you can use these. Like all these will work better whenever you can soak something. So if you can create a bath and soak it, they will work. Molasses. Okay. Did some research on that and experimenting with my stove and just like little random things like rusty wrenches and stuff, and you create a bath with the molasses. Don't know the exact ratio you should try because it's slow though. It's like going to take weeks before it to remove rust off. And so with a van, it's like, or a vehicle or something, a lot of stuff you can't soak. So I'll talk about something I did in a second. But for baths, for removing rust, I thought citric acid was the best out of all these, and vinegar and other stuff I tried. Really good rust remover. And now, phosophoric acid, this stuff is like straight out of the thing. 85%. I got it on Amazon. And rust removal. It does something different. It's like, some people would say it's more of a rust converter. But I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's okay. So first thing I did, this stove, okay, look at the color of it. It's kind of, now the phosophoric acid, so I did a few things with this. Primarily used an angle grinder to remove the rust from all these pieces. And then I think, how did I do? I did a combination of sprays. Now a spray is going to work with your van or undercar. You can take a spray bottle like this and do a mixture. And what's the right, you have to experiment with that. Initially, I started off using this stuff like pure out of the thing on the steel that I used here. I would also, what I would do is, if you tried bolting, like putting a stove together like this with bolts and stuff, I would fix all the rust first before instead of after the fact. And I kind of did a little bit before taking rust off, and then after the fact. Just do it all before and get it all nice. So you can create a bath like these. I took a big garbage can and I filled it up with different liquids I experimented with. Molasses, citric acid. Sometimes I combined them all. And you usually use phosophoric acid to spray. I found that worked a little bit best. And you can spray and scrub. Now, some people say it converts. And I think, yeah, somewhat, but so you see these dark spots. Oh, there we go. You see these dark spots here. That's from the phosophoric acid, and it kind of converted the rust. But sometimes it will only do that if you have thick rust. Sometimes doesn't turn it all black. Some of it turned black. Some of it didn't. Sometimes it only turns the surface of the rust black, but then, so that's what I did initially. Like some of this stuff was black, and then I started sanding it and stuff. Sandpaper is another thing you can use. And there was still like brown rust underneath it. So maybe it converts the top layer somewhat, but it's not always going to go deep. And so, and it leaves some kind of residue, like this kind of whitish stuff is from the phosophoric acid. It's kind of like a powdery residue. So simply said, for removal, so what I would do when I did the van and what I've learned from the stove is I would spray things down to get them wet with a mixture of citric acid and water. And I'd spray everything down to get it wet and then start removing rust. And you can clean it off with everything off with water first before you start. And citric acid's a good remover. Like with the van, like the stove over there, I put it in a big tub with liquid and just let it soak, and worked pretty good. But with the van, you can't really do that. But you can still spray these things. So at different times, I would spray citric acid and molasses, and then I would use this tool, and I would do it, remove it. Sometimes afterwards, I'd wash it down, like rinse it off. And then sort of like my final thing was what I would use, a spray with phosophoric acid, and that would kind of change the steel. Depends where you spray and the extent of the rust. You want to try to get all the loose rust off first. And this I think is a good final thing. Like use the citric acid. This is what I did. Use the citric acid. It's a good remover. There's other stuff out there. What is it? Like a evaporust, different kinds of acids. I didn't want to. Tannic acid is one thing I would like to try, kind of similar to this as like a final thing, because it also can kind of convert rust to a black, different, I don't know, iron phosphate or these different things. This is good final. So before you paint or something like that, you could use this. There's all kinds of different rust converters out there, stuff like Core Seal, and I haven't tried those. I just kind of like the simple stuff, and I like kind of researching and finding out what's inside stuff and just kind of do it myself. That's kind of how I work. And so now, and then you get as much rust off as you can. Maybe you could touch it up with this, or that's what I did. And then I used some spray paint. I used one called Rust Reformer. Now, there's all kinds of different rust paints you can try. I was a little bit like, there's some research. There's stuff called like fluid film. Which is like made from like sheep's lanolin. Now, what I did is I did like a thin layer of spray paint. I used something called Rust Reformer by Rust-Oleum, and then just like a basic Rust-Oleum 2X over that. And it's kind of thin, just a thin layer. I didn't have a bunch of stuff. The weather was really poor, it's cold out, the worst time for doing these things. Finally, what I did is I did a mix of, this is soybean oil. And I had this jar of it, and I got some beeswax. Why did I get the beeswax? I don't know. Through some research, I found out a lot of blacksmiths they'll use oil, different kinds of oil for protecting their steel, and beeswax too. And beeswax, I also found out when I was researching like fluid film, sound interesting. Some similarities between beeswax and fluid film. So I will show you this current state of my van and kind of like where it's at now. So I removed a lot of rust, especially from the back end. Underneath in the back, there was a lot of rust. And took that out, painted it, and kind of show you the slimy final layer that it's covered with. Now, the beeswax and the oil, let's see here. Let's see. All right. So you can see, so this is covered with beeswax and oil. And I did it with a brush. I did try a spray bottle, but anything with wax is gonna like, it's gonna clog up really fast. And you can kind of see the brush marks there. This was all very rusty. Everything here was very rusty, like flaking, scaling rust. And removed it, a little bit of paint, and then finally I covered it with oil. First, the beeswax and soybean oil, and then finally I bought a spray gun. So what I'm talking about, like weird irregular places with that needle scaler, like that, like in those areas, that works good. And so you can kind of see this stuff. Let's see. And you see, it's kind of gross. It's kind of slimy. Basically, I got the idea from Fluid Film on. I was looking at their site, and they said they cut it with veggie oil. Now, which brings me back to my stove. So I'm going to go look at that for a second. So that stove is, finally, it's kind of bluish. If you look at the steel, it's kind of bluish. And that's what the phosophoric acid do. It'll slightly change the color of the steel. And then finally, I just rubbed soybean oil on it. think there's different kinds of oils you can use. Some people say linseed oil or boiled linseed oil. I don't like that stuff because I think it stinks, and they add some kind of toxic stuff to it to make it dry faster. Regular linseed oil. What was I going to show you? Oh, here's stove. So it's kind of bluish, has like a bluish tint to it. And last thing I did, spray bottle, treated it with phosophoric acid, and then I rubbed it down with soybean oil. Works pretty good. Is it like super protected from moisture and stuff? Well, I did that more than a year ago, and it hasn't been outside. I'm not going to put it outside. And it does not seem to be continuing to rust. Now, some places, I can see there's still a touch of brown rust in there. But yeah, you can do pretty good. This was extremely rusty. So you look here, you can see all the pits, the old pits from rust. So now this one was a little bit outside, did the same thing, didn't quite. You can kind of see the black there. That's from the phosophoric acid. This is going to be the base of the stove to hold the stove up. And that's going to screw into the floor, van floor. Now, can you use a spray bottle for the oil? Okay, I tried this. I got it from Harbor Freight. And I tried spraying the mix of beeswax. Of course, you have to heat it up to melt it. And oil. I did about 25% of this and 75% of oil, and it clogged up instantly. So that could be the weather, because it's like freezing out and I'm trying to do this and it clogged, so it wouldn't work. So basically what I did is I used a brush for this, the 75-25 of this. I basically used a brush, and I did about maybe 70% of the vehicle. I kind of covered it. You know, I couldn't, a lot of places you can't reach and it's tough to get into, but I did the best. And finally, in 20 minutes, I just filled this up with oil, heated oil, and I got it to work. And it worked pretty cool. I don't understand all the thing. There's a little hose thing here that fell off when I was using it, but it worked. There's a lot of adjustments here, which I didn't know, but so yeah, that's like how to remove rust from your van, according to me, and that's my experience. So you got some different tools to do it. Don't be afraid. Your best tool to initially, if you're thinking about buying a van, take a hammer with you, okay? Good advice. Get underneath there. It's dirty. And tap on the frame. Everywhere you see rust, tap on it to see if it's not solid. And sometimes, yeah, if the hammer goes through, then yeah, don't buy that van for sure. But sometimes there can be a soft layer, so you got to kind of determine if the rust is really thick, scaling rust. Sometimes the top layer can be real rusty and kind of softish, and but hopefully there's still some good steel there. But you can test with a hammer, pound on it, and see. So that's pretty much all I got to say about rust. And let me know what works for you. If you've tried using different things, different acids or whatever. They have like stronger acids and stuff, like hydrochloric acid and what's another one? Starts with an M. I forget, but I don't want to deal with like super toxic stuff. Citric acid, it's more mellow. I thought it worked really good for removing. This is a little bit more, you get this, it will burn your skin if you get it on it some. So you can dilute it. I would dilute it as much as like 10% and just spray, and then try to, anyways, that's that. Anyways, this is Ian saying thank you and so long.